The satin of Madeline Anderson's wedding gown tore as she fled across the moonlit field, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Freedom beckoned beyond the horizon, but the weight of her elaborate dress slowed her escape from the grand mansion where a marriage she never wanted awaited. Montana Territory, 1875. The night air was crisp with autumn's chill as Madeline ran blindly through the tall grass. Behind her, the lanterns of Copper Creek's wealthiest estate blazed, illuminating the silhouettes of guests, still unaware that the bride had vanished from her dressing room minutes before the ceremony. "You can't outrun a horse, miss," called a deep voice from her left, causing Madeline to stumble in surprise. She whirled toward the sound and found herself staring at a tall figure astride a dappled gray stallion. The moon slipped from behind a cloud, revealing a man with a weathered face partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. His posture was relaxed in the saddle, one hand resting casually on his thigh near his holstered revolver. "I don't intend to return, if that's why you've come," Madeline declared, lifting her chin defiantly despite the tremor in her voice. "Mr. Thorpe can find himself another bride to secure his business interests." The rider shifted, moonlight catching the silver gleam of spurs and the badge pinned to his worn leather vest. "Ain't here on Thorpe's behalf. Name's Riley Sutton, madam. Was passing through when I noticed a lady in white taking flight across the fields." He paused, tilting his head. "Most brides run toward their weddings, not away from them." Madeline gathered the torn fabric of her skirt. "Most brides have a choice in the matter." Riley Sutton studied her for a long moment. The distant sounds of voices calling Madeline's name drifted across the field. "Sounds like they've discovered you're missing." Panic seized her heart. "Please, I can't go back. My father, he's arranged everything without my consent. William Thorpe is 30 years my senior and has buried 2 wives already." Her voice broke. "I'd rather face the wilderness alone than be handed over like property." Riley glanced toward the growing commotion at the mansion, then back to the desperate woman before him. At 28, he'd seen enough of life to recognize genuine fear. "Where were you planning to go?" "To Helena. My aunt lives there. She'd help me." Madeline's fingers twisted nervously in her ruined gown. "I had it all planned, was going to slip away after the rehearsal dinner, but they never left me alone. This was my only chance." The shouting grew louder. Lanterns bobbed in the distance as a search party formed. Riley extended his hand. "They'll catch you on foot, especially in that dress." Madeline hesitated, eyeing his outstretched arm. "Why would you help me?" "Maybe I don't care for men who collect wives like trophies," he replied, his expression unreadable. "Or maybe I just prefer to see folks make their own choices. Either way, decide quick, they're coming." Heart pounding, Madeline grasped his hand. With surprising strength, Riley pulled her up behind him on the saddle. "Hold tight," he instructed, as he turned his horse away from the approaching search party. They rode hard across the open field, Madeline clinging to Riley's waist as the stallion ate up the ground with powerful strides. The wind tore at her carefully arranged hair, sending pins flying until her dark curls streamed behind her like a flag of rebellion. "They'll follow," Riley called over his shoulder as they reached the tree line that marked the edge of Thorpe's property. "But not through the night. Most men around these parts value their sleep more than another man's bride." Madeline shuddered at the word bride. "I'm nobody's bride. Not yet and not ever, if I can help it." Riley guided his horse along a narrow trail through the pines. "Helena's 3 days' ride from here, assuming good weather and no trouble." "I have money," Madeline said. "Not much, but enough for passage on the stagecoach if we can reach the station." "Nearest station's in Silver Creek. Day and a half from here. But that'll be the first place they look." He paused, considering. "Best to avoid the main roads altogether." They rode in silence for a time, the darkness of the forest enveloping them. Madeline's initial terror gradually gave way to the discomfort of her situation. Her wedding dress, beautiful as it was, had never been designed for horseback. The corset beneath restricted her breathing, and the satin slippers she wore provided no protection against the cool night air. As if sensing her discomfort, Riley spoke. "There's a trapper's cabin about an hour from here. Not much, but it'll provide shelter till morning." Madeline nodded against his back, too exhausted to speak. The events of the day, the argument with her father, her mother's tears, the desperate plan to flee, had drained her completely. The cabin materialized out of the darkness like a mirage, a simple log structure with a sagging porch and shuttered windows. Riley dismounted first, then helped Madeline down, her legs nearly buckling after the long ride. "Wait here," he said, drawing his revolver before approaching the cabin. Madeline watched as he checked the perimeter and peered through the shutters before trying the door. It swung open with a creak that echoed in the silent forest. After a moment, Riley emerged and gestured for her to join him. "It's empty. Seems the owner hasn't been here in some time." The interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed occupied another, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in the center. Riley set about lighting a fire while Madeline stood awkwardly, the full absurdity of her situation suddenly apparent as she looked down at her torn and dirty wedding gown. "I don't suppose there's anything else to wear," she murmured. Riley looked up from the kindling he was arranging. "Check the trunk under the window. Trappers sometimes keep spare clothes." The trunk yielded a faded flannel shirt and canvas trousers that would swim on her frame, but seemed cleaner than expected. "Turn around," she instructed, and Riley obliged, focusing intently on the fire. Madeline struggled with the long row of buttons down her back. I can't undo these myself," she admitted after several frustrated attempts. Riley cleared his throat. "I can help, if you'll permit me." She hesitated before turning her back to him. "Please." His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he worked the tiny pearl buttons. "This is quite the contraption," he remarked, his voice carefully neutral. "Seems designed to require assistance." "That's precisely the point," Madeline replied bitterly. "Women's fashion is intended to ensure we remain dependent on others." The last button came free, and Riley immediately stepped away. "I'll check on my horse while you change." Once alone, Madeline shed the elaborate dress with a sense of profound relief. The simple act of removing the corset felt like breaking free from chains. She donned the oversized clothes, rolling the sleeves and pant legs and securing the waist with a piece of rope she found in the trunk. When Riley returned, he paused momentarily in the doorway, taking in her transformed appearance. A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, or approval crossed his features before he composed himself. "You look more suited for travel now," he observed, setting a saddlebag on the table. "It's not much, but I have some jerky and hardtack." They ate in silence, the fire casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Madeline studied her unexpected rescuer covertly. Riley Sutton was not conventionally handsome, but his features had a rugged appeal. High cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. A thin scar traced his right temple, disappearing into his dark hair. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, voicing the question that had been nagging at her since he appeared in the field. Riley chewed thoughtfully before answering. "I know what it's like to have your future decided by someone else." "You were forced into marriage?" she asked, unable to mask her surprise. A wry smile touched his lips. "Not marriage, no. My father had my life planned since birth take over the family ranch, marry the neighbor's daughter, produce sons to continue the Sutton name. I chose a different path." "The law," Madeline said, nodding toward his badge. Riley's fingers brushed the silver star. "Deputy U.S. Marshal, 5 years now." "And your family?" His expression darkened. "My decision wasn't well received. Haven't spoken to my father in 8 years." Madeline absorbed this, recognizing the weight of his choice. "I'm sorry." Riley shrugged. "I made my peace with it. At least I had the freedom to choose, even if the choice came with consequences." He looked at her directly. "What about you? What awaits in Helena besides your aunt?" "A chance," Madeline replied simply. "I taught at the schoolhouse in Copper Creek until Father arranged this marriage. My aunt runs a ladies' academy in Helena. She's offered me a position before." "You're a teacher," Riley said, as if that explained something to him. "I was. I loved it." Her voice softened with memory. There's nothing quite like watching a child understand something for the first time, that moment when confusion transforms into comprehension. Riley nodded. "Noble profession." "It was my mother's profession before she married. She always regretted giving it up." Madeline stared into the fire. "I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistake." The night deepened around them as they talked. Madeline learned that Riley had been tracking a gang of stagecoach robbers when he passed near Copper Creek, deciding to rest his horse before continuing north. He spoke little of his work as a marshal, but shared stories of the places he'd seen: the towering mountains of Colorado, the endless plains of Kansas, the red rock formations of Arizona Territory. As the fire died down to embers, exhaustion finally claimed Madeline. Riley insisted she take the bed while he slept near the door, his saddle as a pillow and his revolver within easy reach. "We'll leave at first light," he said, settling himself on the floor. "Try to get some rest, Miss Anderson." "Madeline," she corrected softly. "After everything tonight, I think formalities seem rather pointless." His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Madeline, then? Good night." "Good night, Riley," she whispered, sinking into the narrow bed. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty of her future, Madeline fell asleep to the steady sound of Riley's breathing, feeling safer than she had in months. Dawn arrived with pale fingers of light reaching through the shutters. Madeline woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of Riley bent over the fireplace, coaxing new life into the coals. "Morning," he said, glancing up. "Hope you don't mind strong coffee. It's the only kind I know how to make." Madeline sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "After last night, I'll take any coffee gratefully." They shared a simple breakfast of the remaining provisions before Riley stepped outside to prepare his horse. Madeline folded the wedding dress and placed it in the trunk, feeling as though she were packing away her old life with it. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear, the forest alive with birdsong. Riley was adjusting his saddle when Madeline emerged from the cabin. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "Silver Creek is too obvious. Thorpe's men will be watching the stage station. We should head northwest toward Blackwater Junction. It's smaller, less likely to be watched." "How much longer will that take?" "Add another day, maybe more." He hesitated. "It means spending more time on the trail." Madeline considered this. "If it's safer, then that's what we should do." Riley nodded, seemingly relieved by her practicality. "It'll mean rough traveling. You sure you're up for it?" In answer, Madeline walked to the horse and placed her foot in the stirrup. "I grew up on a ranch, Deputy Sutton. I may have been wearing a wedding dress when you found me, but I'm no delicate flower." A genuine smile broke across Riley's face, transforming his features. "I'm beginning to see that, Miss Anderson." They rode through the morning in companionable silence, the terrain gradually changing from dense forest to rolling hills. Riley kept them away from the main trails, following game paths and dry creek beds that would leave minimal tracks. By midday, the sun was high and hot, and they stopped in a shaded grove to rest the horse. "We'll need provisions," Riley remarked as they shared the last of his water. "There's a small settlement about 3 hours from here, not much more than a trading post and a few cabins, but we can resupply." "Won't that be risky?" "Less risky than going hungry. Besides, Thorpe's influence doesn't reach that far. It's mostly trappers and prospectors passing through." As they prepared to continue, Riley suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his revolver. "Someone's coming. Stay behind me." Madeline heard it then, the sound of approaching hooves, moving at a steady pace along the trail they had just left. Riley led his horse deeper into the trees, positioning himself protectively in front of Madeline. A solitary rider came into view, an older man, with a gray beard and a pack horse laden with furs. He passed without noticing them, whistling tunelessly as he made his way down the path. "Just a trapper," Riley said, relaxing slightly. "But we should move on. Daylight's wasting." The small settlement of Pine Hollow appeared late in the afternoon, a collection of weathered buildings surrounding a central trading post. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and a handful of horses were hitched outside what appeared to be a primitive saloon. "Wait here," Riley instructed, dismounting at the edge of the trees. "I'll go first. Make sure it's safe." "I'm coming with you," Madeline countered. "A lone man asking questions will draw more attention than a couple passing through." Riley frowned. "You're still in men's clothing." "Then I'll be your younger brother," she said, tucking her hair under a spare hat she'd found in the cabin. "We're just travelers heading north. Nothing remarkable." After a moment's consideration, Riley nodded. "Stay close and let me do the talking." The trading post was dimly lit and smelled of leather, tobacco, and dried meat. An elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from a ledger as they entered, his rheumy eyes appraising them without much interest. "Afternoon," Riley greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "Need some supplies for the trail." The shopkeeper grunted. "Cash or trade?" "Cash," Riley replied, placing coins on the counter. As Riley negotiated for dried beans, coffee, and jerky, Madeline wandered the small store, examining shelves stocked with necessities for frontier life: ammunition, tools, clothing, and preserved foods. A small rack of newspapers caught her attention, and she casually picked up the most recent edition of the Copper Creek Chronicle. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the headline: "Prominent businessman's bride abducted on wedding day, reward offered." Forcing herself to remain calm, Madeline scanned the article. According to William Thorpe, his bride-to-be had been kidnapped from her dressing room by an unknown assailant. A substantial reward was being offered for information leading to her safe return. "Find something interesting?" Madeline startled at the shopkeeper's voice directly behind her. "Just catching up on news," she managed, replacing the paper. "We've been on the trail for a while." The old man squinted at her. "You look familiar, son. Passed through here before?" "No, sir," Madeline replied, deepening her voice slightly. "First time in these parts." The shopkeeper seemed about to say more when Riley called from the counter. "Matthew, time to go. Got what we need." Outside, Madeline waited until they were well away from the settlement before speaking. "They're saying you kidnapped me. There's a reward." Riley's expression hardened. "How much?" $500. He whistled low. "Thorpe must want you back badly." "It's not me he wants," Madeline said bitterly. "It's the land my father promised as a dowry. Our ranch borders his mines. He's been trying to buy it for years." "That explains the desperation." Riley looked troubled. "This complicates things. $500 will have every opportunist and bounty hunter in the territory looking for us. Should we avoid settlements altogether?" Riley considered this. "We need to change our appearance, at least, and we should travel at night when possible, rest during the day." They made camp that evening in a secluded canyon, the high walls providing shelter from prying eyes. Using a small stream that ran through the canyon floor, Madeline washed the dust from her face and arms while Riley prepared a simple meal of beans and coffee. "I've been thinking," she said as they ate, "perhaps you should leave me at the next town. Take me close enough that I can make my own way to Helena. You've already risked enough." Riley looked up sharply. "That's not happening." "But the reward?" "I don't care about Thorpe's money." His voice was firm. I told you I'd get you to Helena safely, and I intend to keep that promise. Why? Madeline pressed. You barely know me. Why risk your reputation, possibly even your badge, for a stranger? Riley set his plate aside, his gaze meeting hers across the small fire. Because some things matter more than a badge. Because what Thorpe and your father arranged wasn't a marriage. It was a transaction with you as the commodity. His jaw tightened. I've spent 5 years enforcing the law, but that doesn't mean I believe all laws are just, and it certainly doesn't mean I believe a woman should be forced to marry against her will. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Madeline, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire between them. Thank you, she said softly. Riley nodded once, then changed the subject. We should cut your hair tomorrow. Make it harder for anyone to recognize you from descriptions. The next morning, Madeline sat on a rock by the stream as Riley stood behind her, with a pair of scissors from the trading post supplies. Her dark curls fell around her in a growing circle as he worked carefully, shortening her waist-length hair to just below her ears. I've never done this before, he admitted, his fingers gently tilting her head. Might not be the most fashionable style. Fashion is hardly my concern at the moment, Madeline replied, though she felt a pang of loss as another lock fell away. Her hair had always been her pride, the one feature even her critical father had praised. When Riley finished, she bent over the stream to see her reflection. The woman who looked back was almost a stranger, hair curling boyishly around her face, accentuating her high cheekbones and large eyes. She looked younger, more vulnerable, yet somehow freer. It suits you, Riley said quietly, watching her reaction. Madeline touched the shortened ends. It's strange. I feel as though I've shed more than just hair. Sometimes change requires letting go of pieces of ourselves, he observed. They traveled for the next 2 days, keeping to the wilderness and moving primarily at night. Riley proved to be an expert navigator, finding his way by stars and landmarks in a way that impressed even Madeline, who had grown up learning the land from her ranch hand father. On the 3rd night after leaving Pine Hollow, they encountered their first real obstacle. A spring thunderstorm swept across the plains with frightening suddenness, turning the ground to mud and the sky to a roiling mass of black clouds. Lightning split the darkness, followed by crashes of thunder that spooked Riley's horse. "We need shelter!" Riley shouted over the howling wind. "There's a line of bluffs ahead, might find an overhang." They pressed forward, rain lashing their faces as they searched for any protection from the storm's fury. Finally, Riley spotted a dark opening in the rock face, a shallow cave just large enough to accommodate them and the horse. Inside, they were shivering and soaked to the skin. Riley worked quickly to build a small fire near the cave entrance, using dry kindling from his saddlebags. The meager flames cast dancing shadows on the cave walls as they huddled close, seeking warmth. "Your lips are blue," Riley observed with concern, wrapping his drier coat around Madeline's shoulders. "You need to get out of those wet clothes." Madeline nodded through chattering teeth. Riley turned his back while she changed into the spare shirt from his pack. The garment was enormous on her frame, reaching almost to her knees, but it was dry and smelled of leather and pine, Riley's scent. "You can turn around now," she said, sitting close to the fire with her wet clothes spread nearby to dry. Riley had removed his own sodden shirt, revealing a lean, muscled torso marked with old scars. One particularly vicious-looking scar ran across his left side, a puckered line that spoke of a serious injury barely survived. Noticing her gaze, Riley touched the scar self-consciously. "Knife fight in Deadwood. 2 years ago. It looks like it nearly killed you." "It did. For a time." His expression turned distant. "Fever took me for nearly a week. Doctor didn't think I'd pull through." Madeline resisted the urge to reach out and touch the mark of his survival. Instead, she asked, "Is that what marshals typically face?" "Often enough," Riley added wood to the fire. Though usually it's less dramatic long days in the saddle, longer nights keeping watch, meals that could generously be called food. A wry smile touched his lips. Not the romantic adventure many imagine. Yet you chose it over your family's ranch. Freedom has its price. He looked at her thoughtfully. What about you? Teaching doesn't seem like the easiest path either. It isn't, Madeline admitted. The pay is minimal, the hours long, and parents can be more difficult than their children. She smiled at some private memory. But when a child who's been struggling suddenly reads their first sentence aloud, or solves a mathematics problem they thought impossible, there's nothing that compares. The storm raged outside their small haven, but within the cave, a different kind of atmosphere developed, intimate, charged with something neither acknowledged. They talked through the night, sharing stories and dreams with the ease of old friends rather than recent acquaintances. Madeline spoke of her mother's quiet encouragement of her education, of summers spent reading under the cottonwood tree by the creek, while other girls learned to keep house. Riley described his first years as a lawman, the mentors who had shaped him, and the code he lived by, one that valued justice over strict adherence to law. My father never understood that distinction, Riley said, stoking the fire as dawn approached. To him, law was absolute. Questions were weaknesses. My father is similar, Madeline replied, duty and obligation above all else. He truly believes he's acting in my best interest by arranging this marriage. Do you think you'll ever reconcile with him? Riley asked. Madeline considered this. Perhaps someday. Not soon. She looked at Riley curiously. What about you and your father? A shadow crossed his features. Too much pride on both sides. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once burned. As morning arrived, the storm passed, leaving behind a washed landscape sparkling in the new sunlight. They emerged from the cave to find the world transformed. Wildflowers had appeared overnight in the prairie, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the previous day's gloom. It's beautiful, Madeline breathed, taking in the panorama. Riley nodded in agreement. Best part of a storm, what comes after. They continued their journey, now drawing closer to Blackwater Junction. According to Riley, they would reach the settlement by the following evening if they maintained their pace. From there, Madeline could secure passage to Helena on the weekly stagecoach. The reality of their impending separation hung unspoken between them, growing heavier with each mile. Madeline found herself studying Riley's profile when he wasn't looking, memorizing the line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. That night, they made camp in a stand of cottonwoods beside a small creek. The spring air was mild, filled with the chorus of frogs and night insects. They sat side by side after their simple meal, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Montana sky. I've been meaning to ask, Madeline said into the comfortable silence. What were you really doing near Copper Creek? It seems too coincidental that you happened to be passing when I needed help most. Riley hesitated before answering. I wasn't completely truthful about that. I was in Copper Creek on purpose, though not for you specifically. Oh? Madeline turned to face him. I've been tracking William Thorpe for months. There are rumors he's involved in more than just mining smuggling, possibly worse. Nothing I could prove yet, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Madeline absorbed this. So you knew who I was when you found me in that field. I knew you were Thorpe's intended bride. I didn't know you were fleeing. His eyes held hers. That part was genuine surprise. Would you have helped me if it hadn't aligned with your investigation of Thorpe? Without hesitation, Riley nodded. Yes. A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night. Riley's hand rested on the ground between them, and Madeline found herself placing her own hand beside it, their fingers nearly touching. Riley, she began, unsure what she wanted to say, but feeling the need to say something. We should rest. He interrupted gently. Tomorrow will be a long day. Madeline withdrew her hand, a complicated mixture of relief and disappointment washing over her. Of course. Good night. Good night, Madeline. Sleep proved elusive for Madeline that night. Her thoughts circled endlessly from the freedom awaiting her in Helena to the man sleeping just feet away. In the few days they had traveled together, Riley Sutton had become more important to her than she cared to admit. The idea of parting ways in Blackwater Junction left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. Morning came too quickly. They broke camp efficiently, now accustomed to each other's rhythms. As Riley secured the last of their supplies to the saddle, the distant sound of hoofbeats caused them both to freeze. "Riders," Riley said, instantly alert. "At least 3, coming fast." Without another word, he helped Madeline onto the horse and mounted behind her. They set off at a gallop, heading for a ridge that would provide better visibility of their pursuers. From the vantage point of the ridge, Riley studied the approaching riders through his field glass. 4 men, he reported grimly. One of them matches the description of Thorpe's foreman. "They've found us," Madeline whispered, fear constricting her throat. "How?" "Someone in Pine Hollow must have recognized you from the newspaper description." Riley's mind was clearly racing through options. "We can't outrun them. My horse is carrying double and already tired." "What do we do?" Riley's expression was resolute as he handed her the reins. "You keep going toward Blackwater Junction. It's about 15 miles northeast from here. Follow the creek until you reach the old military road, then turn east." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." He checked his revolver and the rifle in his saddle holster. "Once you reach Blackwater, ask for Sheriff Davis. Tell him Riley Sutton sent you. He's an old friend, he'll help you." Horror washed over Madeline. "No, I won't leave you to face them alone." Riley's hand covered hers. "This isn't a discussion, Madeline. I'm a federal marshal. They can't touch me without consequences. You're the one they want." "They could kill you," she protested, tears threatening. "They could try," he replied with a grim smile. Then his expression softened. "I'll find you in Blackwater. That's a promise." Before she could argue further, Riley swung down from the horse. He looked up at her, his eyes conveying feelings neither had voiced. "Go now. Don't look back." With agonizing reluctance, Madeline urged the horse forward. After a few paces, she couldn't help turning for one last glimpse of Riley. He stood tall on the ridge, silhouetted against the morning sky, revolver at his side as he waited to face her pursuers. Tears blurred her vision as she rode hard across the open country, following Riley's directions. The sound of gunshots echoed from behind, each report causing her heart to clench with fear for the man who had risked everything to help her. The miles passed in a blur of anxiety and determination. The creek led her to the old military road as Riley had described, and she turned east toward Blackwater Junction. The horse was tiring, but Madeline pushed on, knowing each mile increased her chances of reaching safety. By mid-afternoon, the small settlement appeared on the horizon, a cluster of buildings surrounding a crossroads. Madeline approached cautiously, aware of her unusual appearance in men's clothing with cropped hair. The sheriff's office was easy to locate on the main street. Madeline dismounted, legs shaking from hours in the saddle, and tied Riley's horse to the hitching post before entering the weathered building. A broad-shouldered man with a gray mustache looked up from his desk, his keen eyes immediately assessing her. "Can I help you, miss?" "Are you Sheriff Davis?" Madeline asked, her voice hoarse. "I am." "Riley Sutton sent me. He said you would help." The sheriff's expression changed instantly. "Riley sent you? Where is he?" Madeline's composure finally cracked. "He stayed behind to hold off men who were pursuing us. There were gunshots. I don't know if he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Sheriff Davis was on his feet immediately. "Sit down before you fall down, miss. Start from the beginning." Between sips of water from a tin cup, Madeline recounted everything: her escape from the wedding, Riley's assistance, and the pursuit that had separated them. The sheriff listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When she finished, he nodded once. I know Riley. If anyone can handle himself in a fight, it's him. He stood, reaching for his hat. I'll send some men to look for him. Meanwhile, you'll stay at my sister's boarding house. No safer place in town. What if Thorpe's men come here looking for me? Let them try, the sheriff replied with quiet confidence. This may be a small town, Miss Anderson, but it's my town. Thorpe has no jurisdiction here. The boarding house was a neat two-story structure on a side street. Sheriff Davis's sister, Martha, was a stout woman with kind eyes who asked no questions when her brother explained Madeline needed a room and discretion. The stage for Helena leaves tomorrow morning, Sheriff Davis informed Madeline as Martha showed her to a small but clean room. I'll secure you a ticket under a different name. Thank you, Madeline said, then added hesitantly, when you find Riley. I'll send word immediately, he promised. Left alone, Madeline sank onto the edge of the narrow bed, overwhelming exhaustion washing over her. For the first time in days, she was safe, yet she felt more bereft than ever. The possibility that Riley might not have survived the confrontation was too painful to contemplate. A soft knock at the door roused her from dark thoughts. Martha entered with a tray of food and a bundle of clothing. Thought you might appreciate something that fits better, she said, setting down the tray. These belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Bozeman. Should be close enough to your size. Madeline touched the simple calico dress gratefully. You're very kind. Martha's eyes were shrewd, but compassionate. Been through something difficult, haven't you? Yes, Madeline answered simply. Well, whatever it is, you're safe here. Martha patted her hand. Eat, rest. Things have a way of working themselves out. After Martha left, Madeline changed into the borrowed dress, relishing the feeling of proper women's clothing after days in ill-fitting men's garments. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the stew and bread, her mind fixed on Riley. Night fell, and still no word came. Madeline stood at the window, watching the main street of Blackwater Junction as lamps were lit in windows and the saloon at the end of town came alive with activity. Every approaching rider made her heart leap, only to sink again when it proved to be a stranger. She must have dozed off in the chair by the window, for she woke with a start to the sound of commotion in the street below. Voices called to one another, and lanterns bobbed in the darkness. Madeline pressed her face to the glass, trying to make out what was happening. A knock at her door had her rushing to open it. Martha stood there, her expression unreadable. Sheriff Davis is back. He's asking for you. Madeline hurried downstairs, her heart pounding so hard she could scarcely breathe. In the small parlor, Sheriff Davis stood with his hat in his hands, his coat dusty from the trail. Did you find him? Madeline asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Before the sheriff could answer, a figure moved from the shadows in the corner of the room. He found me, said a familiar voice. Relief crashed over Madeline like a wave. Riley! He stepped into the light, and she gasped. His face was bruised. A cut above his right eye had been roughly stitched, and he held himself carefully, as if nursing unseen injuries. But he was alive, standing before her with that half-smile that had become so dear to her. Told you I'd find you in Blackwater, he said softly. Madeline moved toward him without conscious thought, stopping just short of throwing her arms around him when she remembered his injuries. What happened? Had a disagreement with Thorpe's men about their manners, Riley replied, his attempt at humor belied by the weariness in his eyes. Sheriff Davis and his deputies arrived before things got too unpleasant. 4 against 1 wasn't exactly a fair fight, Sheriff Davis added. Though from the looks of things, Riley was holding his own. 2 of Thorpe's men won't be riding anytime soon. Are they? Madeline couldn't finish the question. Alive, Riley assured her. though considerably less enthusiastic about pursuing you. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. I'll leave you two to talk. Martha's fixing up a room for you, Riley. Doctor will be by in the morning to look at those ribs. Once they were alone, the carefully maintained facade of strength seemed to leave Riley. He sank onto the parlor sofa, wincing slightly. Sorry I worried you. Madeline sat beside him, fighting the urge to touch him, to reassure herself that he was really there. I thought you might be dead. Takes more than a few hired guns to kill a stubborn marshal. His eyes searched her face. You're wearing a dress. Martha loaned it to me. Madeline smoothed the fabric self-consciously. Does it look strange with my hair? No, Riley said, his voice lowering. It looks perfect. Something in his tone made her breath catch. Their eyes met, and the tension that had been building between them for days crystallized into something undeniable. Riley, Madeline began, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. I don't want your thanks, he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. That's not why I helped you. Then why did you? Riley reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of her shortened hair back from her face. Because from the moment I saw you running across that field in your wedding dress, something inside me recognized something in you, a spirit that matched my own, perhaps, a desire for freedom that I understood too well. Madeline leaned into his touch. And now? What do you recognize now? That sending you to Helena alone would be the biggest mistake of my life, he admitted quietly. But I have no right to ask you to change your plans. Madeline's heart raced. What if I told you my plans have already changed? That the woman who fled across that field 5 days ago isn't the same woman sitting here now? I'd say people don't change that quickly. His voice was gentle. They do, when they find something worth changing for. Madeline took a deep breath. I still want to teach. I still want my independence. But I've discovered there are different kinds of freedom, including the freedom to choose who to give your heart to. Riley's eyes darkened. Madeline, what are you saying? I'm saying that I don't want to go to Helena without you, she whispered. I'm saying that somewhere between Copper Creek and here, I fell in love with you. For a moment, Riley was perfectly still. Then, despite his injuries, he reached for her, drawing her gently into his arms. I've been fighting against saying those very words since the second night, he confessed, telling myself it was too soon, that you deserved your chance at the life you planned. Plans change, Madeline said, her hands coming up to frame his face. People change them. Are you sure? You've only just escaped one man's attempt to claim you. I don't want to be another. You could never be like him, she assured him. You helped me find my freedom, not take it away. Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of Riley's injuries, yet filled with the promise of deeper passion to come. When they parted, Madeline rested her forehead against his, savoring the closeness she had feared would be lost to her forever. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, Riley replied. I have 2 weeks of leave coming. I could escort you to Helena, make sure you're settled with your aunt. And then? And then I'd have to return to my duties. For a time at least. His eyes held hers. But marshals can request permanent assignments. Helena has a federal courthouse that needs protection. Hope bloomed in Madeline's chest. You'd consider that? Settling in one place? For the right reasons, Riley said, his meaning clear in his gaze. We could take our time, get to know each other properly. No rushing, no pressure. I'd like that, Madeline smiled. Very much. The stage to Helena departed the following morning with 2 passengers who had not been on the original manifest, a battered but determined U.S. Marshal, and a woman with short hair and bright eyes, whose laughter drew curious glances from their fellow travelers. As the coach rattled northward, Madeline watched the landscape unfold before them, rolling hills, distant mountains, and endless sky. Beside her, Riley dozed, his body still recovering from the confrontation with Thorpe's men. Her hand rested lightly in his, a simple connection that felt more meaningful than any formal commitment. In Helena, Madeline's Aunt Margaret welcomed them with raised eyebrows but open arms. A progressive woman who had chosen independence over convention, she understood Madeline's choices better than most. "So this is the man who helped you escape that dreadful arrangement," Margaret observed over tea in her comfortable parlor. "A lawman, no less." "Yes," Madeline confirmed, exchanging a smile with Riley. "Though I'm beginning to think I might have rescued him as well, in a different way." "Undoubtedly," Margaret said with knowing eyes. "The best relationships are those where the rescuing goes both ways." The weeks that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Madeline began teaching at her aunt's academy, rediscovering her passion for education. Riley, after sending a detailed report about Thorpe's criminal activities to his superiors, received permission to remain in Helena temporarily to assist the local marshal's office. They courted properly chaperoned dinners, walks through the town, occasional rides into the surrounding countryside. Each day revealed new facets of the other, deepening what had begun in crisis into something substantial and enduring. Word eventually reached them that William Thorpe had been arrested on charges of fraud and intimidation. Madeline's father, facing financial ruin after the failed alliance, had written her a letter not asking forgiveness, but acknowledging her right to choose her own path. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. 3 months after their arrival in Helena, Riley received news that his request for permanent reassignment had been approved. That evening, he took Madeline to the bluff overlooking the city, where the sunset painted the sky in colors too beautiful to name. "I never thought I'd find a place that felt like home again," Riley said as they watched the light fade. "Not after leaving my father's ranch. I'd convinced myself that home was a luxury I'd sacrificed for freedom." Madeline's hand found his. "And now?" "Now I understand that home isn't a place at all." Riley turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "It's a person. It's you, Madeline." He knelt before her, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. "I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer you mansions or fine things. But I can promise you this. I will never cage your spirit. Your freedom will always be as important to me as my own." Tears filled Madeline's eyes. "That's the only promise I need." "Madeline Anderson, will you marry me?" "Not because society expects it, or because anyone arranged it, but because we choose each other, freely and completely?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." Their wedding took place on a clear autumn day, exactly 1 year after Madeline had fled across the fields from a marriage of convenience. The ceremony was small, held in the garden of her aunt's home with only a few close friends in attendance. Margaret had insisted on a new dress for the occasion, but Madeline chose a simple design she could move freely in, no corset, no elaborate train to hinder her steps. As they spoke their vows, Madeline thought of how far she had come from that desperate night. She had sought only escape then, running blindly toward an uncertain future. Instead, she had found not just freedom, but love, a partnership of equals built on respect and understanding. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Riley's kiss held the same tenderness as their first, but now without restraint or uncertainty. They belonged to each other by choice, not obligation, a distinction that made all the difference. At the small reception afterward, Sheriff Davis, who had traveled from Blackwater Junction for the occasion, raised his glass in a toast. "To the bride who ran, and the marshal who followed. May you never stop running toward each other." Later, as twilight descended, Riley led Madeline away from the celebration to a waiting carriage. "One last surprise," he said with a mysterious smile. They rode beyond the edge of town to a small property nestled against the foothills. A neat cabin stood among pine trees, with a covered porch and windows that gleamed in the fading light. Behind it, an outbuilding had been converted into what appeared to be a workshop. "What is this place?" Madeline asked as Riley helped her from the carriage. "Ours," he replied. "If you like it. Close enough to town for your teaching and my duties, but with enough land to breathe freely." Madeline walked slowly toward the cabin, taking in the careful craftsmanship, the garden plot beside it, the rocking chairs on the porch. "When did you do this?" "I've been working on it whenever I could these past months. Sheriff Davis and some others helped." Riley's expression was hopeful yet uncertain. "I wanted us to have a place that was truly ours, built from the ground up." Madeline turned to him, joy illuminating her face. "It's perfect." Inside, the cabin was simple but thoughtfully furnished. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, bookshelves lined one wall, and a kitchen area occupied the far end. Riley showed her the bedroom with its handmade quilt, and then led her to the surprise he was most proud of. The workshop behind the house had been set up as a small schoolroom. "For private lessons," he explained, "or for our own children someday, if you want them. Either way, it's your space to teach however you choose." Overcome, Madeline wrapped her arms around him. "How did I find you?" she whispered against his chest. "Out of all the vast territory, how did our paths cross at exactly the right moment?" Riley's arms tightened around her. "Some might call it fate or divine intervention. I prefer to think it was two people who recognized in each other what they most valued in themselves." As night fully descended, they stood on the porch of their new home, watching stars appear in the vast Montana sky. The same stars had witnessed Madeline's desperate flight a year earlier, her wedding dress tearing as she ran across moonlit fields toward an unknown future. "No regrets?" Riley asked softly, his arm around her waist. Madeline leaned into his embrace. "Not one. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't been passing by that night." "I would have found you eventually," Riley said with quiet certainty. "Some people are meant to find each other, no matter how winding the path." As they stood together at the threshold of their shared future, Madeline knew it was true. Their story had begun with a bride running across fields and a cowboy riding beside her until dawn broke, but it would continue through all the dawns to come, written not by circumstance or obligation, but by choice, by freedom, and by love.